Hi, my name is Siobhan Jordan and I'm an artist based in South County Carlow. In March 2023, I was invited to apply for YPCE Artists in Residence funding from the Arts Council of Ireland by early childhood education researcher Muireann Ranta. Our practices align in a lovely way as we're both passionate about the importance of children's connections with nature and creativity. We put together a proposal entitled Earth, My Home, Our Home. This project uses the four main pillars of the Earth Charter as a framework for a series of workshops. We wanted to work with the early years students, lecturers and practitioners to co-create art experiences for young children which would allow for connections with nature and art using environmentally friendly processes and materials. At the start of each of our co-creation workshops, Muireann would introduce the group to that week's theme and discuss pedagogical underpinnings of the workshops. I would then bring in practical creative activities. The first theme of the Earth Charter is respect and care for the community of life. For this theme, I wanted to examine collaborative art projects, ways of working together on a common objective. The processes I brought to our co-creation workshop were good and messy, mark making, using lots of found objects, stamping, printing, both mono and gel plate printing. I brought some homemade inks and paints as well as a selection of natural objects to take prints from or to draw or paint with. We had lovely discussions about getting messy, the tactile nature of the materials and how the children might react to them. On a practical level, we spoke about staining of food colouring and allergies in the classroom. Taking the findings from our co-creation workshop, I set about devising a print workshop for our earlier settings. We worked with two settings for these projects, Play Together Creche in Great Cullen and Great Cullen Parish Childcare Centre. We set the tables together to make one large table and I rolled out a large sheet of paper to allow the children to all work together. We spoke about nature, the children's experiences with nature in their gardens or in the park. I'd roughly drawn on pathways onto the paper to allow spaces for the children to create their own areas, and I brought in some fern leaves as well as some herbs, rosemary, sage and lavender. In our first setting, I had prepared animal cutouts and put out different textured papers and fabrics to decorate them. The children had great fun adding colour to the natural world and standing the creatures so they could play with them. I also brought in some baby carrots we hadn't harvested last year, and we set about making our own nature spaces using Play-Doh to stand up the trees, printing leaves, painting with the ice rink, and using the homemade prints to decorate the spaces. Water-soluble oil pastels were fun to mix with water and paint, and of course it was great fun to take prints of hands. The standout winner in terms of fun was the ice paint, definitely something to bring back in another project. The second theme of the Earth Charter is ecological integrity, and for this theme I wanted to look at low environmental impact art. The processes I brought to our co-creation workshop were paper making and weave. Both of these processes are really fun to do and can be set up with minimal cost using recycled materials. Once you have the setup, they can be used with a variety of ages and they can be used using many different themes and materials. Paper making was really fun. We discussed ways of setting up workstations to suit the children. I'd brought some wildflower seeds with me, so we added them to the paper pulp, meaning the paper can be sown and plants should grow from it. We experimented with adding fabrics, other papers, petals, etc. to our pulp. For our weaves, the participants used recycled textiles, natural materials, as well as threads and wools, with some really lovely results. Going into our settings, I wasn't really sure how the two processes would marry together, but they worked just so beautifully. Again, we put the tables in a big long line so the children could stand and work together. I rolled out a large roll of paper with some flowers and seeds drawn onto it. We spoke about planting seeds and where seeds came from. I brought out some seed heads I collected from my garden and the children extracted the seeds, banging them off the table or picking them out very carefully. There was great excitement of finding some bugs in the seed heads also. The children spent ages just examining the seeds, some under a magnifying glass, and looking at how different they are from each other. Carefully collecting the seeds, the children added it to the paper pulp so they could make some seeded paper. They all made a sheet of round seeded paper so they could give it as a present to somebody. Some of the children hated the texture of the pulp, but most loved playing in it. Weave can be a tricky concept to introduce to children, but the slits I'd put in the paper worked really well, as the paper pieces I provided turned into worms who had to go underground and back up again to help make the soil healthy for our seeds to grow. It was a really beautiful workshop with the lovely synergy of ideas between making seeded paper and weave. The making of healthy soil with the worms, collecting seeds, making paper, planting seeds, growing and decorating their teepee structure that the seeds could grow and flowers could grow up along. All in all, just a gorgeous activity. The third theme of the Earth Charter is social and economic justice. And for this theme, I wanted to look at natural materials and linking back our work and processes to Indigenous cultures. For this, we worked with clay and examined the concept of journey sticks or magical staffs. In our SETU project, we manipulated clay to make pinch pots, and I showed participants how to make coil pots and how to add decoration to their pots and tiles. Clay is so tactile, messy and intuitive that once you have an understanding of a couple of techniques, the sky's the limit in terms of themes and decorations. We made some really beautiful pots with some very intricate decoration. Then we went out on a nature trail to the old famine grounds beside the campus and collected some items to add to our journey sticks. It was lovely to get outdoors and have an opportunity to connect with nature. Journey sticks were used by Aboriginal people when going on long journeys or adventures to help them to remember what they did while they were away and to aid storytelling of their adventures. We discussed ways of bringing these processes to younger children. In the settings, we once again pushed the tables together to make a long work area and rolled out our large roll of paper, which had some images of rock art from Carlow area drawn onto it. We spoke about ancient Ireland, a time before electricity, devices, roads, or even McDonald's. The children were aghast at the idea of not having their beloved chicken nuggets and tablets. We asked how you would entertain yourself, and some were lost, but some said they would go outside and play. We talked about how the rocks would have been maybe carved with symbols to tell stories, or were they just for decoration? We asked the children if they could make their own ancient land on the paper and what would that look like. We gave out small pieces of clay and showed the children how to make pinch pots. We also put out some greenery, branches, leaves, herbs, flowers that I'd brought in from my garden. The children loved to draw on the paper with the clay. Some were hesitant as they didn't like the feel of the clay on their hands and how their hands were dirty. They drew on the paper and wrote letters on it, and intuitively they started to assemble the most gorgeous clay sculptures from the clay and the leaves and create entire worlds of their own. Some made nests from the alder cones and off the branches, and some made faces on the sticks. Some used the sticks as rolling pins and started to roll out slabs of clay to play with, and we had lots of snakes and worms as well. After a while, we went outside to find more treasures for our journey pockets. These pockets were adapted from our journey sticks after our co-creation workshop on Friday. Preschool educators expressed concern at the children's abilities to tie things onto the sticks and suggested coming up with other ways of collecting treasures. So I repurposed some old IT Carlow greeting cards by taping the sides and leaving one side open and wrapping a cord around them so the children could weave some things into the side of the pockets as well as collecting things in the pockets. We had great fun walking around the green area in the settings. Both settings are lucky to have nice outdoor spaces, and we collected leaves, daisies, even some sweet wrappers. In one of the settings an airplane flew over, which caused great excitement as we were trying to imagine where they would be off to. When we came back inside to the tables, the children decorated the outside of their pockets, and we used strips of fabric and colours and pastels. All in all, it was a beautiful workshop where the children really connected lovely to both nature and their ancient history. The fourth pillar of the Earth Charter that we looked at was Theme 4, Democracy, Non-Violence and Peace. And for this I picked some meditative art. I wanted to work with maybe paper flowers and book sculptures, light boxes, paper exploration and sensory explorations. We had a younger group for this, aged 1.5 to 2 year olds. So in the settings, we brought some of our learnings from our meeting at SETU with the early years practitioners. So in terms of the setup, We figured it had to be on the floor. The actual leaves and flowers from the garden looked beautiful with the light, so I wanted to bring in more of that. While we were in SETU, we looked at cyanotype. I thought it might be a little bit too advanced for 1-year-olds, so we didn't bring that into the settings afterwards. But we set up tables in the settings as best we could. There were oval tables, so they didn't quite slot in together, but we set up 2 light boxes on the ground because children couldn't reach them if they were up high on the table. So we put greaseproof paper over the tables with the aim to draw on top of it and examine those drawings then on the light box. The pastels were great. They were okay on the paper, but they ripped it a little bit. And we looked at the flowers and petals that I brought in. They smelt the herbs and dissected the flowers and looked at individual petals, which were very beautiful. And then they just loved exploring the flowers. They ripped the petals off and found some spiders and bugs, which is very exciting. And then we brought out some paper and sticks, and we demonstrated how they could make maybe their own bugs. So the children made bugs. They really enjoyed tearing the paper and folding the paper and listening to the crunching and the sensory of that. We brought some of our objects then over to the light box to examine. Very quickly, the light boxes became drums and the sticks were being used to bang off the light boxes, and some songs were sung. There was a good racket. We put out some ice paint. Some of the children wanted to leave the light boxes and go back and play with the ice paint. And then the sensory bags were a huge hit. So I made simple sensory bags using oil and water and food colouring and some petals and seeds from the garden as well. They were really, really beautiful actually, and the children really enjoyed exploring those on the light boxes. They loved squeezing them and throwing them about, and they just looked really, really pretty. So at that stage, some of the children were getting a bit tired, and we're beginning to just kind of go to the chill out areas and take a little break. I think in future, what might be a nice thing to do, I think the greaseproof paper wasn't great with the substrate. It wasn't a great substrate. I think if we used ordinary paper, like tracing paper, and maybe make a cardboard frame so that each child could have their own individual composition. They could play with it at the table, maybe make mandala or a picture from the petals and from the torn paper composition, and then bring it over to the light box to examine it. I think it might be a nicer way to develop the project. It also would be a better substrate for the ice paint and the pastels, which the children all loved working with. This project was funded by the Arts Council of Ireland. It's YPCE Artisan Residency Scheme. So I'd like to thank the Arts Council and SETU Carlow for their support.